Welcome to this class tonight where we're going to be talking about a different way of looking at animals. It's a metaphysical perspective, but it's a very big divergence from what most people perceive of animals, I think, in this world. In general, we see them as sort of lower than us. We see them as less intelligent. We see them as somehow a lower life form. And in this class, I'm going to present the idea or the perception that perhaps animals are actually a higher form of life than we are. But I want to make the argument for the idea that animals are actually very, very different than we are. Now, we know they're a different species, but they're still part of the oneness. You know, the animal life, the plant life, the earth, the sun, the moon, we're all part of the same story. And humans have a tendency to see ourselves from a very egocentric point of view, where we see ourselves as the center of the universe, the most important piece of the puzzle, whereas actually every piece of the puzzle depends on every other piece of the puzzle. And it's about things like how this information came into being was I was teaching an EFT class at a Hawking College, and there was a woman there who had Lyme's disease. And whenever anybody has an illness, I always look for the metaphoric explanation of what's going on. Illness is never random. It's never a punishment unless you punish yourself. And it's never nonsensical. So Lyme disease is what? Lyme disease is generally caused by a tick bite. Well, when you think about ticks, what do you think about? You think about animals, right? So I started asking her what happened, because it's always autoimmune. Whenever Lyme's disease is an autoimmune disease. And whenever somebody has an autoimmune disease, it's always self-punishment.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Why else would your immune system attack you? So she had an autoimmune disease, so she was attacking herself. And I said, what did you do that was so wrong that you are attacking yourself? And she couldn't come up with anything. Until later in the class, she mentioned the fact that she had put her dog down. And that it was her best friend. And her best friend, her dog, had run out in front of a car and gotten hit. And they didn't think they could save him. And so she had made the decision to put her dog down. And she felt like she had killed her best friend. So why in the world would she manifest Lyme's disease over that? Lyme's disease is an animal disease. It is a dog disease. And when we started exploring that, I started getting information about this topic that has been real helpful for me. Now I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about a story I read one time. It was a story in a book called Einstein's Dream, I believe. I'm going to paraphrase what I remember about it. Obviously, I'm not reading it to you verbatim, but there's a story in there about a man who had invented an intelligence meter. So he could come over to your house and hook you up to the intelligence meter and see how smart you are. Well, you can all guess where this is going. So he takes it over to his dog and he puts the intelligence meter on his dog, and it goes way off the charts. And so the guy looks at his dog and he goes, okay, fess up. And so the dog starts to tell him the story about how humans have actually been the servants of dogs forever. That they figured out a long time ago that if they just would act stupid and be all loyal, humans would take care of them. So now the gig was up. So the guy and the dog have a conversation or whatever, and they decide at that point to get up and go for a walk. Well, when they walk outside, there's all the other dogs. Not all the other dogs, but a horde of dogs. And they know what has happened, and they kill both the man and the dog, because that information can't leak out because their entire species is at risk here, you know. So that was an interesting idea for me. And then I remember reading this book. I'm just telling you how the pieces all came together. I read this book called Power versus Force. I've talked about this book in other classes, and it's by a man named Dr. David Hawkins he's in Sedona, Arizona. And Dr. Hawkins is a world-famous psychiatrist who had one of the biggest one of the most successful psychiatric practices in the country at one point. He's an elderly man in his 80s now. And at one point in his life, he undertook a project to study consciousness. And what he did was he wanted to measure consciousness. And he used a tool that many of us are familiar with, which is a tool called kinesiology or muscle testing. And he's a very good kinesiologist. And he often says that you can find truth in a 7-year-old's arm. If you can just find a 7-year-old, you can always find the truth. And he did this scale of consciousness which started at 0, which was basically the level of death, and went all the way up to 1,000, which was the level of ascension. When he did the muscle testing, he found that Jesus and Buddha and Krishna all tested at around 1,000. Humankind, at large, tests at a 208. Now, the reason that's important to understand is that the level of integrity is 200. Up until the year 1987, humankind tested at 199 after an event called the harmonic convergence, where the stars aligned in a certain pattern and people from all over the world prayed and did ceremony. Humankind leapt 5 points overnight, unseen in any other point in history. And since that time, we have been on an accelerated pace, and we have jumped up 3 additional points, if my memory serves me correctly. Now, the reason that's so important is that 199 is below the level of integrity. Before that point, humankind as a whole was more likely to lie to you than tell you the truth. They were more likely to take advantage of you than they were to treat you well. And we were more likely to blow ourselves up as a species than we were to survive. Because as humans, we were not yet strong enough to manage our own power. We didn't know that we are conscious creators. We did not know that our thoughts were important. We had put all of our power into the institutions around us. The institution of government, the institution of religion, the institution of education, all of those things were holding up our society because humans had not yet figured out how to do it. Now, on the Hawkins scale, a cat's purr is a 600. The thing that's relevant about that is that 600 is the level of unconditional love. And there are only a few people on the planet at any given time who reach a level 600. I think the number is 2 or 3. It is the first level of enlightenment. And it's the reason why we keep raising our vibration. We reduce the resistance to what is, and we raise our vibration, and we raise our vibration so that we can become more and more light-filled. And that's the process of enlightenment. But a cat's purr was 600. It was already the level of enlightenment. So, if a kitty cat sits on your lap and he purrs, he raises your vibration. There was an interesting story how Hawkins says that one person at a frequency of 1,000 provides enough light to hold up the entire planet. And that's why when the planet really gets into trouble, we will get another avatar. So in that way, Jesus was a savior. He saved us from killing ourselves off, from more bloodshed, from more negativity on the planet. His light was enough to save us all, assuming you believe he existed. Buddha, same thing. Krishna, the same thing. Muhammad, by the way, checks in at a 700, still above the level of enlightenment, but not at the place of ascension. And if you look at the history, Muhammad did not ascend on his own. He ascended on the back of an angel. He was taken there with the help of someone else. And Muhammad came back and died by the sword, which is what has lowered the frequency of the Islamic religion, and part of the reason why we're still in these embattlements with them today. And yet a kitty cat, who has no resistance, is essentially at the level of ascension right now. It is my estimation that they come here as servants. They are enlightened beings already, and they come here to help humanity and holding us up. Because until now, until 1987 especially, we could not do it on our own. But if you go out and you've had a crappy day, surrounded by other people who are not enlightened, who are struggling for your energy, getting in energetic battles all the time. You know, we think we're having arguments, but what we're doing is having energetic embattlements. Because we don't know where to get our energy. We don't know how to manage our energy. We give our energy away freely. We steal it from other people. We're constantly in embattlements for energy. So if you go out into the world and you have this awful, horrible day, and everybody has stolen your energy, and you come home and you're depleted, and your puppy dog jumps in your lap, you're filled back up. They give freely of their energy to support us. They hold up our world. This is my estimation. And if you notice, in areas where there are a lot of economic difficulties, slums, poor families, people with traumatic histories, you will find a lot of animals. If you go into the streets of Haiti, which is one of the lowest frequency countries on the planet according to Hawkins, you will see animals running amok everywhere. Not because they haven't taken care of them. You know, in the United States we have all kinds of rules about it. It's because they will hurt themselves without animals. They need them there to maintain the balance and the harmony of their environment. And in cities where you can't have the bigger pests, rats will, and rodents will come on and take the work. And we leave them alone to a large degree. You know, we don't expect them to go into our houses and pet them or whatever. They just simply hold the frequency up wherever they are. We see them as bad, gross, or evil, but they're serving us in exactly the same way as a domestic animal does. Some animals, in my opinion, are actually taking on illness for us. I think all animals will take on illness for us if they love you. I think that there are certain animals who are sort of assigned to you. They are your soul animals, and they travel with you from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. Just a quick aside, I have 3 cats right now, but up until March of last year, I had a cat named Tigger who was my best friend, loved him, still love him. And before Tigger, I had another cat called Asia. And Asia and I were together for about 7 years, and he was starting to get old and kind of worn down at 7, which is not normal, but that's just an indication of what he was doing for me. And so I got Tigger to keep him busy and active so he wasn't by himself all the time. Well, one day, I was getting ready to go to work, and Tigger came into the room and stood next to me and yelled at me in a panic to follow him into the other room. So I picked up and went into the other room, and I heard Asia coughing under the couch. I thought, he's just coughing. No big deal. So I was in a hurry and was afraid of being late for work, so I turned back around, went back in, started putting my makeup on, getting my hair done. Tigger comes right back in, freaking out again. Come follow me. So I looked down, and Asia had dragged himself into the room next to me, and he was having a heart attack. It was a bad day. So I took him to the vet, and she said he's in kidney failure. 2 things that are important about this, okay? One is, a few years ago, I started getting high blood pressure and heart palpitations. I've since gotten that under control to a large degree using different alternative healthcare methods. But what I realized was my kidneys had become backed up because I was drinking so much diet soda and so much iced tea. And I wasn't paying attention to the fact that I was just dumping phosphoric and uric acid into my system on a daily basis. And I wasn't drinking enough water to flush it out. And the result was that my symptoms were coming about because my kidneys were essentially failing on me. I realize now Asia was helping me. No cat needs to die at 7. But he had been taking on the stress of my kidneys for me to help heal me until I figured that out. And I'm going to tell you some more stories about Tigger in a minute. But then a few years later, Tigger got lost one day. I couldn't find him. He didn't come home. And so I called up Debbie Smith, who's a local animal communicator. And I said, Debbie, where is Tigger? I can't find him. Now, it's only been like an hour, but I didn't like it. So we combed the neighborhood, and he didn't come, and I didn't appreciate it. He's an indoor-outdoor kitty. He has his own kitty door. And so she said, shoot me over a picture. So I had a picture of Tigger sitting on my front porch, whatever you want to call it, right in front of my old car. And I shot it over to her. By the time she responds, Tigger was home. She says, but do you see the orb right next to Tigger? And I had never noticed that there was an orb on the picture. And for anybody who doesn't know, an orb is a little, almost like a light that shows up in circular form predominantly on photographs that have been showing up for the last couple of decades quite consistently. And they often have little faces inside of them, and they're thought to be spirit messengers. And she said, did you have another cat? And I said, yeah. And she's like, he was gray with green eyes. And I said, yeah. And she said, he's your soul animal. And they take care of you. And even though you can't see him anymore, he's here with you. And since then, I've been told that Tigger still sleeps at my head at night, which is why my new cat probably goes up there and swats around all the time. Because that's another thing that's interesting about animals is that we think they don't communicate with each other. But it's absolutely not true. They're communicating with each other telepathically all the time. And there's all kinds of research that was done by a guy named Rupert Sheldrake called the morphogenic fields, where animals in particular are very sensitive to the morphogenic field, and they're communicating with each other all the time telepathically. Part of the evidence for that is that when you go out and you come home, oftentimes your dogs or your cats will be rushing to meet you before you get within visible or audible range. They're connected to you energetically wherever you are. Have you ever watched your cat stare at things you can't see or play with things you can't see? You think, what are they doing? My cat will sit and just stare at nothing in the wall. And I realize now that their frequency is so high that they see the other world. They see the cat sitting in front of them that doesn't have a body anymore. And so energetically, with animals who have already passed out of their bodies. Because animals don't have the same separation that we have from the unseen world. They don't have a fear of death in the same way that we do. When it came time for Tigger to die, it's still his saddest day ever. He purred. He was laying there on the couch, ready to die. He laid there and purred while he was passing away. I would pet him and he purred, a little tiny purr in the background. But to them, purring is a way of raising our vibration. It raises their vibration. It's a way of raising our vibration. The way I see it, it's like laughter. So when you come into the room, they're in such joy, they will laugh. They raise their vibration to a place of joy because you're there. And they do it for you. Now, they do have the same instinct of survival. They have a survival instinct, which is not the same thing as free will. Humans have the gift of free will. I don't know if it's a gift or a curse, but we have free will. We have choice, and we have decision-making to do. We have judgment. We have perception. Those are all things we, I believe, chose to learn how to manage our own energy. That's our work. But animals run on instinct. They work completely in congruency with the divine at all times. And they don't have that same fear of separation because they know it's not real. And they also know that they come back. You know, if you read any of Richard Bach's books, and he talks about, Richard Bach, who wrote Illusions, which is one of my favorite books ever, he talks about how when they went into the other realms, they could see the connections with their animals and how animals would come back to them over and over and over again in different forms. It would be the same animal in 12 different bodies. Whether or not that's accurate, I don't know. But it's an interesting perception. The other thing about animals that makes me believe that they're a much, much higher frequency than we are is that not only are they telepathic, but they're highly intuitive and they're highly instinctual and they're highly intuitive. So another story about Tigger. I had a roommate who really connected with Tigger. They were good friends, and he helped him out a lot. But he was a young kid. He was only 21, and he was kind of disturbed, brilliant. But his intention was to eliminate all emotions from his life. He wanted to be Spock. And so anyway, one night I was in bed, and Charles was in the room directly across from me. And Tigger did the same thing that he did the day that Asia died, where he just came over to the side of my bed and started screaming at me. Wake up! And when I would look up, he ran over to the door like he needed to be let out. Well, he had a litter box in my room. He didn't need to get let out. And there was food in my room. He didn't need to get let out. But he was adamant. So I ignored him until finally I got up and let him out. Well, that wasn't good enough. He wanted me to follow him. So he started scratching at the door. So I got up and I followed him. And he took me to Charles's room and started meowing outside of Charles's door. Well, I wasn't going to wake Charles up because Tigger wanted to go in and play, or whatever he wanted, I didn't know. So I took Tigger, we went back to bed. Later that day, I had a business partner. We were working on a company called Procotech at the time, and she came over to the house, and she had a 7-year-old son. And she had brought him with her that day. And so we're sitting in there working while her son Alec is out roaming the house. And he comes back in a few minutes later with a fully loaded pistol in his hand that apparently Charles had laying next to him on the floor in his bedroom. I talked to Charles about it. A few weeks later, I come home from, it was President's Day. And I came home from being at my friend's house working, and I walked in and straight through was another door, and Tigger was outside. And that was uncommon because it was a snowy, cold day, and I normally wouldn't put him outside, and neither would Charles. Charles would know better. So I go over and there was Tigger, very, very anxious to get inside. And I looked over because that door was right next to Charles's door, and there was a note on his door, and he had committed suicide. So he had shot himself in the head just a few minutes earlier. He had put Tigger outside because I know, in retrospect, that Tigger saved him that day. I know that he was laying there in that bed with a gun to his head trying to figure out what to do. And I know that Tigger said, "We got work to do." And as someone whose work was to be the savior of the household, he went to that door and stopped him. And so when the time came for Charles to actually do the deed, he had to put Tigger away. So animals are very, very intuitive and powerful, and they come here to serve us. I think that's true of animals, even like pigs and cows, who come here and their work is to provide us essentially with food. My parents are farmers, so I grew up around animals, and it was always hard when slaughter day came. You know, you knew the name of the animal. They were your friend. You always knew who you were eating. So you get a different perspective of animals that way. And there's a certain level of gratitude that comes with it that doesn't happen when you don't know what the animal really gave up for you. Because they come here in service. And they come here, and they're a much, much higher frequency, I think, than we are. And that's part of the reason why I think animals don't live very long. If you look, there aren't a lot of animals that live very long lifetimes. Except, I would say, birds. Parrots can live to be 100 years old. Now, if you look at a bird, have you ever noticed how when you look at a bird, they jerk? I think that the birds in particular are so high frequency that our eyes can't keep up with the flicker rate at which they're moving. Do you understand that? Our eyes work at a certain flicker rate. And I think it's 28 cycles per second, I think, is the flicker rate of the human eye. And that's why when you can watch a movie, even if you look at the film, there's like black space in between, but you see it as if it's happening in real time, and that's because of the flicker rate. Birds are moving faster than the flicker rate of our eyes. And so they appear in and out, in and out, in and out. So when we see them, our eyes have to really raise their vibration to see them at all. And we see them as jerking because our eyes can't keep up with the speed at which they vibrate. That's just a theory that I have. You know that they're a higher frequency because they can actually fly, which is something that we can't do. Now, I think that's true of the upper world or the underworld. So if you looked at reptiles and things like that, I think their frequencies are very high as well. Just a little bit more on animals and their ability to heal us. There are actually animals out there nowadays that smell cancer, and they're using them in various labs because they will be an early indicator. So if you see an animal who is constantly coming up and laying on your breasts, if you're a woman, I guess for men too, men do get breast cancer, but that's a consideration. Or if you see an animal constantly smelling an area of your body and then curling up on it, what they're doing is they're healing you. Another thing is, be very, very cautious if your animal gets sick. A friend of mine has a cat who has diabetes right now. She's pre-diabetic. Her animal is doing everything it can to heal her. So there's her indicator. If you have an animal around you who gets arthritis, you want to start looking to your own health, because they're taking it on for you. I don't think that's 100% all the time, but I think there's a very, very, very high ratio on that. So be very cautious of the illnesses that your domesticated animals have, because those are great indicators that that's something you want to look at in your own life. So that takes us to why dogs and cats don't stay around very long. Everybody here knows somebody who is what we'll call low vibration. Somebody who's a victim or a vampire, and you walk into the room and you just feel them sapping everything you've got out of you. Social workers, my God. Can you imagine a more difficult career than going out to people who need help all the time? I won't say low vibe, but people who haven't learned how to manage their vibration at all, who, are living in squalor and addiction and all sorts of terrible conditions, and they go into the house with these people, And they do it day in and day out, or person after person after person. It's no wonder that people don't stay in that industry very long, or that career very long. And it's amazing that nobody wants to pay for it. But we all know what it's like to walk into a room with people who are not at the same vibrational frequency as you are, right? And as you raise your frequency in this lifetime, what happens? Many of your old friends drop away. So the people who are at your frequency level at one point, were your best buddies, you might be drinking buddies, and you're going out and you're drinking together all the time, and then you raise your vibration, and you're not drinking anymore. And you don't have anything to say to your old drinking buddies. And that happens in many, many circles. So as you start to do your spiritual work, you find that some of the lower vibrational frequency people in your life fall away. Now, this is not meant as judgmental. It's merely meant as an indicator. It's like if somebody's in second grade, they are not less than somebody who's in sixth grade. They're just in a different place. Okay? But as a sixth grader, you're probably not hanging out with second graders. Right? Because that's where you are. So, animals, in my opinion, are essentially ascended masters who have come here to help us. But in order to do that, they have to lower their frequency to our dimension. So, when you go to visit somebody who's a lower vibration than you are, and they start complaining about this and victiming about that, how long do you want to stay? So if you were an animal and you were making the agreement, all right, I will go and I will serve Rex. Rex is going to need me. I'm going to show up at his doorstep one day and I'm going to stare up at him and he's going to want me because this is my work. I know he needs me. But here's the deal. I'm staying 7 years and then I'm out of there. It's like a contract. And I think that when they lower their vibration to that degree, and they work as hard as they work, there's a cost for that. And I think that the result is that they literally say, I'm not staying a long time. I will serve for this many days and this much time, and then I'm out of there. And I think that's part of their agreement. And that's why, like the woman at Hawking College whose dog died and she had to be a part of it, her dog ran out in front of a car. Now, the dog has lived on the same street for 20 years and had 1,000 cars drive by. Why on that particular day did it decide? And she said it was like he wanted to get hit. Why did he fling himself under that car on that particular day? It was because, yoo-hoo, I'm out of here. It doesn't mean they don't love you. They'll serve you from the other dimension. Just like a social worker can go home and do their work to make sure you get their money. They don't have to be in the room with you holding you up. It's the same situation with animals. They will still serve you, just not in the physical body anymore because it's simply too hard to stay here for that long. And so they leave. And in her situation, the dog did not die on the spot. And I think a part of that is because it's a great honor to them for you to be with them during their passing. That's an honor. We see it as some painful thing. But oftentimes an animal will go off by themselves to die because they don't have anyone that they would honor enough to do that with. And there's also a part of your soul often that needs the transition time. Sometimes people need it to be completely clean. They just need the dog to get hit by a car and be done, or to run away and never come back, and that's what they can handle, and that's the death that the animal will choose. But if they trust you and they think you are developed enough to handle it, they will choose to die with you, and that's an honor. But many people do not perceive it that way. Or they will ask you to take them out, in the case of euthanasia. Now that's love. You have to love them enough to let them go. And that's love. And we need to do that with people here soon too. It's just really ridiculous that we refuse people the right to die.
Well, what about the people who abuse animals? Mm-hmm. Why would they come here?
I know.
What would be their purpose to allow someone to either starve them or ignore them and not love them or even beat them?
It's a really good question, and I wish I had all the answers for you. You see these animals who are in research labs and stuff. You want to talk about service to humanity. I saw some mouse the other day that they're growing an ear on the side of. What are they doing? Talk about service to humanity, because no one in their right mind would do something like that, and I don't care if it is done in the name of science. I think that some people are so low vibe that they will kill other people and they will hurt other people if they do not have an outlet. And so the animals come here and serve us in a really, really big way. Many of those animals do not live long. They'll come in, they'll do service for a year or service for 2 years, and then they leave the body and move on because it's just simply too hard of a life to bear. But you have to understand that animals also have the ability to teleport. You see them and they're in meditation or they're sleeping for large portions of the day. Right? So you wonder, how can an animal sleep 12 hours a day? Well, they're actually traveling. They're teleporting and they're traveling and they're doing work from the other planes while they're sleeping. And that's why oftentimes if you take an animal while they're sleeping, a domesticated animal, and you touch them, you'll see that shock that happens where they jump up and they leap and they're actually calling their soul back into their body very rapidly because they've lowered their pulse rate, they've lowered themselves down to the astral level to survive or to do their work. These are just my beliefs. I don't have any way of proving any of this. This is just my perspective on them, and I'm offering it to you as something for consideration. But in a situation like that, those animals spend a lot of time out of their body as a way of maintaining themselves in the body, and they're just in the highest form of service that an animal can do. And animals that come in as food animals are the same way.
Makes me sad.
It does make you sad. But doesn't it make you feel grateful?
Oh, yeah.
And gratitude is another one of those things that we as humans need to develop to ascend to the next level. So that's another one of the gifts they give us. I mean, if there's anything on your list of gratitude, isn't it your animals? Isn't it the food on your table? You know, isn't it the harmony in your household? And those are all things that are given to you as gifts from the animals around you. And people who don't understand it, I don't trust. People who are not animal people, I don't get it, and I don't trust them. Because something about it doesn't make any sense to me. Yet the other thing that's notable is that animals live in complete non-resistance most of the time. I mean, have you ever seen a cat that when you pick them up got stressed out? I mean, sometimes they turn completely into a bowl of jelly just picking them up because they have so little resistance and so much faith and trust. That's the whole thing, is that they don't live in fear. They have instinctual protection where they will run away from something that will hurt them. That's built in, that's instinctual. But they don't live in fear. It's not a fear. It's survival instinct, and that's different. What we live in as humans much of the time is fear. Animals absorb that for us and transmute it for us. Another thing, if you notice, is that animals will react to energy medicine like that. If you have, like my Tigger, not my Tigger. No, I wish I could have saved Tigger. I did give him energy healing, but it wasn't enough. It was his time to go. But I have a cat now named Nemo. He's a little Bengal. He's the cutest thing ever. But Nemo's really, really hyper. And when he gets completely out of whack, all I have to do, and I blame Marianne Hollis on this, if you're listening, Marianne. She's the person who runs the Humane Society locally where I got Nemo. And a few nights before she brought him here, she had to take him home with her because he had kennel cough, and she was giving him medication before she brought him to me. And she started giving him Reiki at night to calm him down because otherwise he would be all over the bed. And, you know, so now I have to give him Reiki, Marianne, when he gets hyper. But you'll find that they love it because you're giving them back energy instead of simply taking energy, which is a nice change. Anyone else have any questions about this? I think that's really the whole teaching. That's everything I wanted to talk about. Not a very long class tonight. So the idea that they're not just stupid.
They're here to help us.
They're here to help us. They're here to serve us.
Yeah.
And that if you notice, there's way more animals on the planet than there are humans. And that's because it takes like 5 to 1. You know what I mean? Even if they're not living in your house, they're in your backyard, they're in your, they're in your crawl space, they're in the community, holding you up. And that's because we simply couldn't make it without them. So that's my perception. And I appreciate all you guys coming. Thank you all very much.